I'm Naomi Hall, and I want to welcome you to the virtual summit on stress management for educators. And my whole goal with this is to provide powerful and practical stress management tips so that you can reduce your stress. Because I know that education is a very stressful field right now.
Mm.
And when you are stressed and overwhelmed, you can't find that quality time for yourself. You can't find it for your family. And you need that time. It's so important. So, my goal is for you to be able to find some of that through stress management. And so, today I have with me Dr. Patrizia Collard, who is a psychotherapist, a mindfulness teacher, and a stress management consultant and lecturer in psychotherapy. So, welcome.
Welcome to you. Nice to speak to you.
Yes, this is wonderful. So, I'm so excited for people to hear these interviews. And I think it's also exciting and interesting that I've been able to gather an international collection of experts. So, you're coming to us from the UK. So, a little bit
Yes,
different perspective, right?
I live in the UK. I was born in Austria, Vienna, and I lived 9 years of my life in Hong Kong and China.
Oh,
So, um, and it was very interesting because when I lived in China, you
mhm,
know, it was just after Tiananmen Square, after the terrible event. And
mhm,
loads of companies were sending their first or second representative out to start creating, a business relationship with the new China. And
mhm.
those people, of course, had to be the best in their field, or at least that's what they thought. And they couldn't all bring their families and
Mm,
children because at the beginning of my stay, there wasn't an international school yet. Later on, we had an American and an international school after 3, 4 years, but not at the beginning. So some of them came on their own. And you know what it's like when you've got loads of pressure on you. You need to
mhm,
perform well. You need to set a new business up with
mhm,
people who barely speak your language because Chinese didn't, at that time in the 90s, didn't really speak a lot of English. And so these people that I was seeing professionally were all extremely stressed because they didn't
mhm,
have family support, they didn't have the friendship support, and they were in a completely alien environment.
mhm. Yeah, I can imagine that was very stressful. So you have quite the
Yeah,
cultural background, multicultural background. Um,
multicultural, yes.
yeah. So you're also a published author, and I came across your
Yes,
little book of mindfulness, and I
yes.
found mindfulness to be so useful to me. So how did you get started in mindfulness?
So when I lived in China, I initially started with Tai Chi because you saw all the Chinese doing it every morning when I was on my way to work. I could see them doing it, so I thought that's a good idea. And
Mhm,
then a few years later, so that was already mindful movement, if you want.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
but a few years later, I was going through quite a difficult time, stressful time in my life because my second child was diagnosed with severe autism. And
mm,
you know, at that time, the movie, Rain Man hadn't been out and I had no idea about autism. And of course, I didn't have the support network that you would have in your home country. In
mhm.
autism, I mean, of course, there were also autistic people, but it wasn't something that people talked about.
Right.
And I was very, very concerned. How could I help my child to get the best help? And
Mm,
around that time, I met an Indian lady who was also as a spouse in China. So her husband was working for the Indian embassy.
mhm,
And he said, when we talked, she said, I'm a yoga teacher and a mindfulness teacher. And if you want, we can work together. And I said, yes, great. And we lived literally 5 minutes walk away from each other.
mhm,
So it was then to help myself and to be the calmest that I can be and the best mother I can be for a child with developmental difficulties, I started practicing yoga and mindfulness twice a week. And she said, every other day when we don't see each other, please practice at least 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And often, you know, the longer I practice it, you lose time if you are truly in a meditative state.
Mhm.
Initially, the mind is still very busy, and the mind, you know, has automatic negative thoughts or automatic list-making thoughts or automatic daydreaming thoughts. But after a while, when you settle, you lose the awareness of time. And I then noticed sometimes I was sitting for 20 or 30 minutes and it appeared like 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So, you know, eventually when I was more advanced, I had to actually put an alarm clock on if I had a meeting to attend or whatever. So this is how and why I started, you know, self-help and to be a calm, you know, mother to my son. And then in the year 2000, I moved to London, UK, and I went, so I was a fully trained psychotherapist, a fully trained stress management coach. I was also trained in alcohol and drug counseling therapy. So I had, you know, quite a widespread field where I could work in. And I started working at a hospital, London Bridge Hospital, and then also at the University of East London, which is one of many universities in London. Anyhow, and I was teaching psychotherapy, teaching mindfulness. And then I went to a conference, which was organized for psychotherapists for CPD, for continuous professional development. And there was an afternoon workshop called mindfulness. And I thought, yeah, let me have a look what that's about. And there they started for the first time in the early 2000s talking about mindfulness as a therapeutic tool, not just for calming yourself, but actually using it in psychotherapy. And they had research, and it was extremely effective for chronic pain, for depression, for anxiety, and for stress. And the first person who ever wrote a book on mindfulness was an American author, John Kabat-Zinn, and he wrote a very big book, a big, it takes years to read, and it was called Full Catastrophe Living. And I thought, yeah, that he's put his finger on it. You know, life can often be a full catastrophe. And of course, the citation is from a movie with Anthony Quinn, Zorba the Greek.
Okay.
And I don't know whether you're probably too young to remember that movie, but it's a very famous movie with Anthony Quinn playing a Greek, and he's doing some Greek dancing and singing. And people ask him, are you ever down? And he says, of course, life and the full catastrophe. And so he, you know, John Kabat-Zinn took that very impressive line as the title for his book. And then I decided I wanted to train to become a mindfulness teacher, because now I knew in America, at least, they had started training, not the UK yet. And I inquired, and of course I had 2 children that were still not really able to be left alone. And anyhow, so I was thinking, well, how can I do that? You know, that was long before there were online courses. Started using emails and things like that, but not online courses there. So we're talking about 2002, 2003. And then I found out that Bangor University, which was the first university where I ever worked as a lecturer. But, you know, it's almost like going round the whole circle. University was going to offer the first training in the UK or in Europe for mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and I trained in both. So that was really from my own personal experience, then adding the training and having yet another, so stress management, cognitive psychotherapy, integrative psychotherapy, drug and alcohol counseling, and now mindfulness. And then I did another training about 12 years ago in mindful self-compassion training that was developed again by two Americans, Christine Neff and Chris Germer. So, and then how did it come about that I started writing books? Well, I started writing articles and interviews already in the 1990s and early 2000s, interviewing psychotherapists and experts. Then I wrote 3 books that were mainly, co-wrote with 2-3 other people, books about psychotherapy. And then I also started writing little, giving interviews about mindfulness, and somehow, and of course, I had my web page, which showed all the different things you could book with me.
Mm-hmm.
A very clever writer and editor found me and said to me, called me, and we happened to again live just 5 minutes. I mean, London is 12 million people.
Right.
And round the corner from each other. And she said, have you ever considered writing a book that's a little bit different to the John Kabat-Zinn book? A book about mindfulness for the general reader that isn't 400 pages long. And so I said, of course I would consider it. Can you get me a contract? And she said, yes, absolutely. I can get you a contract. What would you want to call that book? So my very first book, which was the mother of the book that you got the baby, the little book of mindfulness. Prior to that, I wrote Journey into Mindfulness. And Journey into Mindfulness was already, a lot more accessible than Full Catastrophe Living, which is a brilliant book. It's just, how many people read 400-500 pages? I mean,
Right. People see that and just walk by.
Unfortunately, it's a brilliant, and of course it's read by researchers and experts, but not for the general public. So my journey into mindfulness was really quite successful. And then I said, can you write something even more accessible, even smaller? And that's how I came about to write my second book, The Little Book of Mindfulness, which became a bestseller. And I sold, 5 years ago, the last time I checked, it was 2.5 million copies. And I was on Amazon and bestseller on Spiegel magazine, was translated into 16 languages. And hang on a second, I must show you something. I show you 2 copies of the 16 languages. So this is the Russian version, Little Book of Mindfulness. So I wonder whether Putin has got a copy. And then this is the Japanese version of the Little Book of Mindfulness.
That's so cool.
I could show you many more, but it's just like Japan, Russia, and of course all the European languages, and yeah. So, and from there, I continued writing, and in total I've written about 15 books by now. And yeah, and I've just done also my first video course, which is a 10-session, half an hour, teaching people mindfulness. And that's going to be released in the next few weeks. I just got literally an email today that they've now completed editing it.
Okay.
We filmed it in January. And it's just how long it takes. Often when you see a movie comes out and then you notice that it was filmed the year before. So the cut, editing, and making it all smooth. So I've been talking a lot, but that's my story.
That's great. It's such an interesting story. So what are some of the benefits you've seen personally and then with your clients from using mindfulness?
Well, mindfulness is bringing your attention to a deliberate focus, on purpose and without judgment. So you could, for example, I'm looking mindfully at that lovely ornament you have behind you, the sort of bluish, purplish flower on it. So I could now do a mindful viewing meditation where I just focus on one object, or I'm just looking out of the window without going up, down, side, but just on one view. And I just let everything sink in. And I've done meditation, the viewing meditation, with a white wall. And it's amazing what you can see. Eventually you start seeing the brush strokes. You see little insects captured, unfortunately, in the paint and so on. So mindfulness makes you more aware of what is happening in your life at this very moment. Because so often we are aware of the pains and the troubles and the difficulties, but many a times we actually miss out on the joys and the beauty and the fabulous moments in our life. So I always say to people, mindfulness will not make your life automatically perfect, but it helps you to see, have a broader picture of what your life is about. Things I don't need to teach you, because we've got, neural pathways that always make us aware when there is danger, when there is something negative. But sometimes just to have a neutral stance, or even notice little treasures, a butterfly flying by, or a lovely sound, somebody playing the violin next door, or walking through the grass barefoot, or along the beach barefoot, or watching a mountain, all these things, and actually spending not just a split second, because we are very often, your whole theme is stress management for educators. So one of the problems is that when we are stressed, we create chemicals that keep our body in high alert. So that means we are prepared for the stress. But of course, it exhausts our body if it goes on long term. Mindfulness, like listening, or doing a body scan, or viewing, or mindful walking, helps you to come back into the space of peace, and helps you to start switching off the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress response, and switch back on the parasympathicus, which is the well-being response, where you produce endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, the well-being chemicals. So, but it's not done in a split second. The stress response is a split second. Thank God. That's how we survive if a crazy motorbike driver is coming up towards us and we have to decide, am I going to jump back or run quickly forward? Otherwise, I'm going to be hit. So the stress response is split second survival response. But getting back into the parasympathetic nervous system takes a few minutes.
Yeah.
Switch off the amygdala and then the adrenal glands, and then slowly the body starts producing the well-being chemicals. And so mindfulness can help us to get into that space of being, of calmness. But of mindfulness makes us also more aware of the difficulties. But then we have more of an opportunity of taking a moment and looking at the difficulty and seeing whether is it actually as horrible or as awful as my first impression was, or may I just sit with it a little bit and, come into balance and see maybe there are ways out, maybe there are solutions that I haven't thought of. So mindfulness gives you also that time that you need to come up with alternative solutions and get out of the stressful situation. And the last thing that it helps you with is, it helps you to be more self-compassionate, other
Mhm.
compassionate, but also self-compassionate, and say to yourself, when you are in a situation that can't be resolved quickly, which sometimes in education is the case,
Right.
um, then you just say, okay, mindfully breathe, be with yourself, accept the difficulty that is occurring right now, and know everything passes sooner or later.
Mhm.
This will pass.
Mhm.
So those are the different aspects of mindfulness that can actually help you to have a more balanced life.
Mhm. As you were describing that, I could think of different moments throughout this week where I've had those moments of I take a short walk in the morning and just noticing the birds, the like I live in a rural area, the pigs, the sheep, the goats,
Lovely.
noticing the sun rising. And then last week I had, a difficult situation that came up and I just stepped back and took some time to look at it, evaluate it, just let it sit before I did anything with it.
That's right. Being with. So mindfulness helps you to be with whatever life offers. And so
Mm,
sometimes the being with gives you enough time to come up with alternatives or just to sit it out. When
mhm,
you burn on your hand, sometimes you just have to accept that will take 4 to 6 weeks before it heals, you know.
mhm,
But sometimes being with something and just sitting it out and also
mm,
give you new insights. If you had,
mhm,
because the problem with the stress response is that it's very effective for survival, but it shuts down all the other areas of the brain that are not necessary at that time. So
right.
creative thinking, memory, all these things are actually diluted or even switched off when you are in a full-blown stress response. The
Mhm,
mindfulness helps you to open all the different areas of your brain to be more creative, to come up with new ideas,
mm.
alternative viewpoints, etc.
I think that's so important because I think so many educators are in that stress response
Yeah.
most of the time. Um, yeah, which
And
explains
then,
why like you struggle with creativity and thinking and solutions and
yeah,
yeah.
and how can you be a good teacher, and make it interesting for the recipients, whether they're children or adults,
Mhm,
when you are very stressed, because, the energy that you're sending out when you're very stressed is not very invitational. People want to run a mile from a very stressed person.
mhm,
So, it's not good for you, but it's also not good for the group of people you're working with. So if you really want to be heard, if you want to be understood, if you
mhm,
want to be accepted, and if
mhm,
you want to come back to your lessons,
mhm,
a little dose of mindfulness will go a long way.
mhm. Yeah, and I'm thinking it's helpful to the students too to practice some mindfulness
Of
to
course.
be receptive to learning and focused and all of that.
Yeah. And to know that some things take a while. We know that the brain needs to hear certain things 10 to 20 times before it's properly locked in.
Mm,
Each brain is slightly different, and not to be impatient with yourself, self-judgmental, to say, okay, I remember the bit, but I need to read it again or listen to it again or, you know, go through it again, and then not be upset about that, because that's the normal way of getting results. uh, Repetition, patience, and calmness. The calmer the brain is, the more it can actually, switch on the memory bank, as it were.
mm. Yeah, that's important. So you are a very broad spectrum in your skills and certifications, and you're an author. You have a therapy practice. You teach. So what are you working on right now? What are you doing in the field of mindfulness? Are there any more books coming?
Well, as I said, I've just finished one book last year, came out just before Christmas. And then in January, we did this 10-session recording online teaching course, which will any moment now will be released. And right now, I'm not working on another mindfulness book. Right now, I'm writing a novel.
Okay.
It's a kind of psychological thriller where a psychotherapist and a very, very challenged client, and the whole story, what happens between them and what happened to the client before and why she got to the place where she needed therapy. So it's yeah, I hope, at the moment I'm about a third of it I've written. So this is my project at the moment. And otherwise I am teaching a mindfulness course in Vienna, Austria, which runs over the whole year. So once a month, we either meet in person or online, depending on where I am, because I hop between London and Vienna.
Okay.
Yes, I'm double taxed, and and I've got my practice in Vienna and in Britain and London. Yeah, and I just, for example, today I got a request from Rome because I'm visiting professor at Rome's Institute for Psychotherapy, and they've just I've already done 3 or 4 presentations for them. I do 1 or 2 a year, and so they want me to do one in December on mindfulness and compassion for carers.
Okay.
Which is a very interesting theme, because there are people who are trained to be a carer, but many people end up being a carer for their elderly parents or for a sick child, as I experienced in my life, without having any training for caring. And it's an extremely challenging
Yes.
job, if you want to call it a job, or position, a way of life to be in. So that's what I'm going to do for Rome. Yeah. And in the autumn, I'm also going to train again level 1 and level 2 teacher training for mindfulness. So that's happening in October, November, December. Yeah.
Nice. So
There's always something.
Yeah, it sounds like it. For our audience, where can they start with mindfulness? What's a good first couple of steps for them?
It depends on the person, I like books, but I'm an older generation. So I like books. I like, that's why I haven't just written the little book of mindfulness. I've also written the little book of meditation, into mindfulness, and then also compassionate living. So I've written lots of books. I've also written big books, the Mindfulness Bible, for example. It's a bigger book. But so some people, and I've also written MBCT for Dummies. I don't know whether you know the For Dummies.
I do. Yes. Yep.
Are they? Yeah. Like that one.
Yeah.
So some people like that one because it includes the whole 8-week course that we usually, or in my case, what I'm doing in Vienna now is an 8-month course. So giving people more time in between sessions to practice. So some people like to get, for example, that book because it includes the course, and it has also all the meditations recorded. You can download them. And then there are individual chapters on anxiety, depression, trauma, aging, parenting, relationships. So this is quite a sort of useful guide. But again, some people would find that too big. So maybe then getting something like the Little Book of Mindfulness, which is you can carry with you and literally read 1 or 2 pages, you know, whenever you are waiting for a bus or for a train or in the queue in the supermarket, rather than getting upset about the
Yes.
oh, I could use that opportunity. Here in my little pocket, I've got my little book. And other people prefer maybe the entry point of downloading an app. There are various mindfulness apps, and I'm not going to mention them because they are my competitors. But you know, soon there will be my online course. So these are ways. The other option is finding a meditation teacher or a meditation center near you and just attending, you know, either. I mean, I would recommend people to attend more than just one session because, you know, not everybody clicks immediately. And anyway, how much can you teach in one session? So some people who like the personal energetic exchange, they might benefit from from attending a course, maybe in a yoga center or a Buddhist center or whatever. You don't have to be a Buddhist, you don't have to be a Hindu. I mean, these things are just teaching you the skills. And of course, you can give people my website, and I also teach people one-to-one. So I've got, you know, I've recently taught somebody in Dubai.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So, you know, somebody who is extremely busy in Dubai, they only have 1 day off per week, and he wanted to learn it. And so we just arranged with the time difference and so on. We arranged a time that was suitable for both of us, and then I taught him that way. So there are many ways that lead to Rome or lead to mindfulness.
That's wonderful. And then you have a free gift that you're providing for our audience. Can you tell us a little bit about the 2 meditations you've provided for them?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they've been sent to you already.
Yeah.
I've instructed my administrator. So one is the body scan, and the other one is the 3-step breathing space. So one basically a meditation where you scan your whole body, but you start at your feet and then work your way up to the head, because we're all living in our head. So we want to get far away from our head, down to the feet, not only when they're hurting, but actually as a starting point for this meditation. So that's a longer practice. Whereas the 3-step breathing space is a mini meditation of 2-3 minutes that you can basically use when the going gets rough, when you're, I don't know, before an interview, before a new date with a new possible special person, or when you're upset about something. Then the 3-step breathing space is a meditation that literally just takes you through, you know, 3. So if you imagine like an hourglass, so the white space of the hourglass just looks at what's happening right now. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What are my body sensations? Then you go into the middle part where you just focus on mindful breathing for about 10 rounds, and then out the white space at the bottom where you ground yourself, root yourself, and visualize an image of strength or of peace, like a mountain or the calm sea or a big oak tree. So that is a mini meditation. You can sit on the toilet, you can wash your hands, you can stand in the queue. You know, nobody will notice even that you're doing it. The other, the longer one, which many people like because you can lie down for it. So people with stress, very often sleep difficulties. So the body scan is a fantastic way of, you know, of either falling asleep, or if the sleep is interrupted, of spending time to calm yourself down and get something that is equally beneficial as sleep is. I mean, the Dalai Lama only sleeps about 5-6 hours a day, but he meditates 6 hours a day. So need so much sleep if you meditate. So
Yep.
those are the two gifts.
Those are fantastic, and I started listening to the body scan, and it's fantastic, and I can see how it can definitely be beneficial for those people who really struggle to sleep, and I think that's
Yeah,
a lot of teachers are
yeah,
just running
because
so much.
stress,
Mhm. Yeah.
stress creates high levels of adrenaline. And normally, when you're not in a stressed situation, when the sun goes down, your retina actually receives messages that are sent to the midbrain saying, slow down to the amygdala, two almond-shaped size parts of your brain, and they get the information. It's getting darker, slow down adrenaline production. That's why we shouldn't eat too late
Mm,
and work on the computer with blue lights or
right.
telephones too late. Basically, if you're not in a stressed state, then the adrenaline production will go down, and instead melatonin, the sleep hormone,
Mhm.
produced. But if you're stressed, then the adrenal glands are still hyperactive, and
Mm,
it's barely possible to fall asleep. So then doing something like the body scan,
mhm.
you know, to calm yourself down, you might even fall asleep during you're listening to it.
That would be fantastic.
Yes, wouldn't it? Yeah,
Just tripped right off.
better than popping pills. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I
Or
love that there are options
using
like
the
that.
sort of,
Mhm.
gin
Yeah.
and tonic and what or whatever, a glass of wine.
Right. Yep.
Unfortunately, alcohol is a depressant, so many people they use it, in order to calm down, but they don't realize that actually it is not very wholesome for the body,
Mhm.
certainly not in larger quantities. Mm.
Right. I love that there are healthy options and non-chemical options for us
Correct.
to start working on, and very, very effective options.
Yes.
So
And the
I love
body
that.
scan, I thought I sent you that one because that's one, for example, that I've also been teaching in primary schools to little children, three,
Mhm.
4 year olds, preschool, primary school, whatever you call it in
Mhm.
America, I don't know, the sort of you know,
Preschool, elementary.
elementary. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
you lie down with them on mats on the floor and you just, use maybe slightly different words to make it a little bit more accessible for the little minds. But
Yep.
that is a very, very nice practice to do with children and to
Mhm.
teach parents, educators. Parents are educators anyway, but
Mm.
parents, educators, and children alike. It's accessible for everybody, and it can be done sitting down or lying down. And
Mm.
sitting for a long time is something that skill that you need to acquire over time. But lying down, we all know how to do that.
I can do that one quite well.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for these wonderful gifts for our audience. And I want to thank our audience for joining us. In your email, you have links to those 2 meditations, and I encourage you to try them and practice them multiple times. Kind of as Patrizia alluded to, like, this isn't a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Like, in order for it to be effective, you've got to practice and use it more than once. So maybe start this week using the body scan when you go to bed, and use it each night. Try the breathing meditation at a stressful time in your day. So try those out, use them multiple times, and that's when you're going to see more and more benefit from them.
Yeah. Because our brain is neuroplastic, so we can create new neural pathways that will be helpful for having a more peaceful life.
Yes, which is what our goal is, a more peaceful life. So thank
Yes,
you, Patrizia. Thank you to
absolutely.
our audience, and I hope everybody has a
Thank
fantastic
you.
day.
Bye bye. Take care.